Hello, hello, and welcome to the April episode of Thought of You, a podcast where me, Amelia, and my friend, Taylor Elise Morrison, talk about all the things that we've been sending each other in our Signal chat all month long.
And really, the biggest update of this month is that we have been dethroned as the most consequential Signal chat of 2025 because, fortunately, we don't do war crimes and plan war crimes in our Signal group chat.
Yeah, not yet at least. I mean, who knows where life will take us, but I don't see us planning any bombings of Yemen in our conversations, which are mostly just sharing pop culture links back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So, welcome to Thought of You, where we don't talk about war crimes. Well, I guess we talk about them and don't commit them. And every episode, we kick off with a first thought, best thought, which is just the thing that is on our mind the day that we are recording. So, Taylor, will you take us in with your first thought, best thought for April?
Absolutely. I was resistant to this first thought, best thought because I was like, am I gonna keep talking about poetry on this show? But guess what? I am. I had a really hard month. I'm not going to get into all of this, but what I have noticed as someone who was raised in the evangelical church is that hard things will happen and there will just be a scripture that pops into my mind. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's low-key triggering. I was like, I would like to have other things pop into my mind when I'm going through a hard time. And so I was walking to the grocery store thinking about, oh, maybe I should start memorizing poetry. It's like, oh, that would be so cool. Love that. Hop onto Instagram later that day, and I see Sam Sanders repost an essay all about the power of memorizing poetry and how it can be this way to also eliminate doom scrolling. And the author of this essay, I haven't read the whole thing, just this snippet that was in an Instagram story, but is the author is saying that instead of pulling out your phone to see what atrocity has happened, what if you just had written down a piece of poetry and you pull it out to read it and practice memorizing it? And so that's something that I'm planning to do. I don't think I mentioned this on the show, but my uncle sent me a signed copy of a Langston Hughes book as a gift because I have done a personal project related to Langston Hughes and just feel really connected to his work. And so I think I'm going to do some Langston Hughes. There's a great poem, which is also the name of the book that my uncle gave me, called Dream Keepers, that honestly is just my job description. Like, that's what I feel like I'm here to do in the world. So that's the first order of business, is memorizing Dream Keepers. And it's short and sweet, so I'm confident that I can actually memorize it.
I love this so much. So I have one poem memorized because I had to memorize it in the seventh grade. It was like a test. And I still have it memorized. We did not plan this. I did not know this was coming, but I'm going to recite this Robert Frost poem because I want to see if it can unearth from like the literal 13-year-old me or whatever. Okay. I think the poem is: Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then nope, something's wrong there. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. Dawn goes down today, nothing gold can stay. It's that-ish is the poem. Nothing gold can stay. Robert Frost, don't look me up, don't cite me. Go read the poem.
The good news is Robert Frost is no longer for this world, so he can't at you.
Yes, like I cannot be atted by Robert Frost. But I do find like comfort in thinking about it. I was just thinking recently that I just like don't try to memorize things anymore. Like period, the end, like anything. Like even like it would be great if I would memorize like my business EIN because I have to look it up constantly, but I have not done that. I feel like I haven't memorized anything since I left school.
I can't relate. I do have my EIN memorized. I have a lot of songs memorized. I have another EIN that I have to memorize now. So actually, I'm going to memorize this Langston Hughes poem and I'm going to memorize this new business EIN. Those are my goals. I can do this.
I believe in you. Okay, my first thought, best thought is less poetic, less poignant than yours. And mostly it is that when I was logging on for this, I was looking back at our last episode to check something, and I noticed that I have the exact same manicure that I had last time we did an episode. And I don't mean that I like got the same color painted on. I mean that I have not had my nails done in at least a month, if not more now, and they are driving me nuts. They are so long. And I am fascinated by this about myself because I was a chronic nail biter for my whole life, like childhood, well into my 20s. And I didn't stop biting my nails until I started getting these dip manicures that I get every 3 weeks with my mom and my aunt. And you can't bite your nails with acrylic on them. Like, that's not a thing that you can do. It doesn't work. My teeth are not strong enough. So I quit biting my nails. And now I have these like long nails and like people comment on them and they know them, but like I still identify as a nail biter. So it's like a very confusing cognitive dissonance sometimes when I see my own hands, even years into this. Like, I've been getting dip manicures for years now. But I too, as you shared, Taylor, have had a very hectic, confusing past month. And I have had like 4 different nail appointments scheduled that have all had to be canceled for reasons ranging from like there was a blizzard in March in Nebraska to like somebody died. Quite literally, I had to reschedule around that. And it's just been like, when am I getting my nails done? I don't know. Like, I'm leaving here to go to a funeral, to fly on another trip. I will circle back and let you know if I have gotten my nails done by May or if I am just hanging out. We'll see what happens. Stay tuned.
To be continued. Well, I have some things that we need to circle back on. We have some things because we just kind of lived in the moment with our Alinea experience and we're like, great, that happened. That was amazing. And we never looped you all in. So let's like take a moment, go back to the place of our Alinea experience and maybe share some highlights with the listeners. We're sorry. We were just being really present.
I know we were so pumped about it. We hyped it up so much and then we pretended it like didn't happen. Oops. Um, okay, Taylor, tell me one of your favorite things about our Alinea experience. I feel like we can't like take everybody through it start to finish. If you want this experience, we encourage you to go have it for yourself. We encourage you to start a whole business with your best friend and then just run that business for 2 years and decide to stop and have the money to go. However you do it, that's your journey. But Taylor, what was one of your favorite things from our fancy dinner?
Yes, the little raviolo explosion. I still think about that. That was February. This is April. I still think about it at least once a week. It was just such a sensory experience. This little raviolo explodes in your mouth with this rich, think of kind of like a soup dumpling, but even more of an umami flavor. Oh my gosh, my mouth is watering right now. That was delicious. There was, in just all of the little elements, I loved the course where we had this I'm assuming it was hand blown or mouth blown, little glass dish, and you eat your little dish off of it. And then they say, surprise, the rest of your course is on the other side. And you flip it over, and there's this like gelatin deliciousness there too. So yes, the food was delicious, but also just all of the surprise and delight that happened. I just, oh, I'm trying not to bump into my microphone and stuff because I'm getting so excited playing it back in my mind.
It just reminded me that like the culinary arts are an art form. And so often I'm just like eating for utility, right? It's like me and a Cliff Bar or more likely a fig bar in sitting at my desk eating lunch. Like, that is not an artful experience, but like going to this meal, and it is a whole experience. There are so many courses. Every dish has an experiential component, and it was so fun to just like be surprised, as you said. I think one of my favorites was actually the sort of like course that came between the savory and sweet aspects of dinner, where they brought out this sort of like ice mountain looking thing, and it had a bottle on it, and that bottle had a pear inside. And it's a narrow neck bottle. So you're like, how did they get this whole fruit in there? And they tell us that they're actually grown this way. Like, there's this farm in Michigan who, after the pears flower on the tree, they put the bottle up there and attach it, and then the pear grows into the bottle, which like should be obvious to me, but felt like magic to me. I was like, that is wild. I want to go to the bottle pear farm. That's got to be wild to see. But then they took this like water that had been distilled or whatnot with the pear and turned it into Italian ice, which was so good. And like pear is one of my favorite flavors when it's done well. It can be so gross if it's like artificial and not good, but like when it actually tastes like a pear, it's one of my favorite things. So I really loved that. And then I was 100% a sucker for the final course or two courses, perhaps the dessert, where they put it all over the table. Like I watched Chef's Table. I knew this was coming. And then they did the edible balloon and I was like waiting for it. And it lived up to every expectation I had. Like it was so fun and so delicious.
Yeah, it was just a delight in trying to explain it to people, even Matt, because Matt has not watched the chef's table. He was like, "Wait, so you ate a balloon?" I'm like, "Yes, it was amazing." I also feel like we have to share because it's just who we are. We have been playing around with more ways for us to collaborate. And then in the final two courses, we were like, oh, this is it. This is the next project we start together. So we are not announcing that here, but it did happen. The Alinea magic, something sparked.
Yes, it came through for us. And also, when we got there, they asked us, like, are you celebrating anything? And we said, we're celebrating friendship. And then at the end of the night, they give you a menu of everything that
Mhm.
you ate. And on ours, they wrote, cheers to friendship, which was so cute. And if you're watching on YouTube, I'm holding it up, and my cat is rubbing her face against it right now. But I really loved, I don't know, just this celebration. As we said when we talked about it before, like doing this sort of thing with a friend is so, it felt so special to do it with you. And JJ was definitely was and is jealous for sure.
We'll do another one with all four of us because I think Matt would enjoy that too.
Yeah, I can't wait to go back and specifically to go back in a different season because
Mhm.
the menus are so seasonal because they're based around fresh available produce. And I think that, you know, because it was winter, there was a lot of like creaminess. I wouldn't say any of the dishes were heavy, but I'd be so intrigued to see how they would do more of like a salad or like when you have a ton of fresh vegetables in season. Like our meal had a lot of root vegetables and like I would love to see what they do with like summer vegetables. So if I went back or when we go back, I would love to do it in a not winter, summer, fall, any other time. And I hope that that is in our future. I can't wait.
It is. And so it is.
Okay, I have one more circle back that I am bringing today, which is that I want to just, I guess, like offer another take or resource on the telepathy tapes. So, back in our first episode, we talked about this podcast, the telepathy tapes, that Taylor and I had both listened to. It was popular then, and I think has only gotten more popular. Like, it has been the number one podcast in the US on Apple and Spotify at various moments. And the premise of the show is essentially that the host is speaking to these families for the most part where one of the family members is autistic and nonverbal and has a caregiver that experiences telepathy with them. That the autistic person can read their mind and communicate in these ways through telepathy. So it's not always a caregiver, sometimes it's friends. There are other variations as the episodes unfold. But Taylor and I talked about it, and I definitely brought some like skepticism to the initial conversation, but also an openness. I mean, I'm really open to things that we don't understand, or at least don't understand scientifically, being real lived experiences in the world. But I just wanted to share that one of the people that I look to for perspectives on the autistic experience is an autistic academic named Dr. Devin Price. And Dr. Price wrote a Substack piece basically arguing that this podcast is pretty dangerous and even harmful to autistic communities. And I thought it was important just to mention that here. So in the Substack piece, which we will link in the show notes, Devin talks about how the podcast is really about facilitated communication and how this is a practice that has been widely discredited and debunked. And they provide a lot of resources for understanding that more. So I can admit that I don't fully understand what's happening in the podcast or exactly like the practice of facilitated communication, why and how it's harmful. but I thought it was worth at least naming that there are definitely people from the autistic community who are saying that this podcast is problematic. And there's also an episode of the podcast Conspirituality that kind of takes apart the telepathy tapes as well. So we'll link those in the show notes if you would like a different perspective on this show. And if you listen to it yourself, I'm also very open to seeing you in the comments and hearing what you think about it.
I appreciate you bringing that. And I think that's a good way for us to start to move into what we want to talk about next.
Next, we want to talk about this book, Careless People, that my cat just knocked off of the table right before we were going to talk about it. But let me tell you about this book if you have not heard about it. So, the full title of the book is Careless People, A Cautionary Tale of Power, Greed, and Lost Idealism. It is a memoir by Sarah Wynne Williams. And she was the first original director of global public policy at Facebook. And this book is essentially a memoir of her time at Facebook. So it really starts, well, wildly enough, it starts with a shark attack that she experienced as a child, which is like kind of this, I think it's meant to be a sort of like entry into her sort of psychology and who she is as a human being. But we kind of jump from there to the point where she works at the UN and then she decides she wants to get a job at Facebook. And it takes her a while to convince Facebook that they need to have a diplomat on staff. They need to have somebody who is prepared to communicate with national governments all across the world and undergo like diplomacy with different states. And so eventually she gets this position created for her and she does become their director of global public policy. Now, this book then charts like her entire career, which Taylor and I will talk about some anecdotes from shortly. But it ends when she is fired from Facebook on her account around like this accusation or claim of sexual harassment that she made to HR that then eventually got her fired for bringing it up, bringing this to light, making these accusations. I read the whole book in like 2 days. It reads like reality TV. It's like so fun. It's so propulsive. And my big takeaway was just like, fuck Facebook, fuck Mark Zuckerberg. These people are awful. I felt very vindicated in all of my work around Off the Grid. But before we dive into those stories and exactly why, I did also just want to say that part of the press around this book has been that there was like a gag order or a public speaking injunction put on Sarah Wynne Williams kind of through a bunch of lawyering from Facebook because they were essentially like, you signed an NDA, you cannot talk about this publicly. And so even the book was already out, but she's not been able to do press around it, which I think led to some people's interest and intrigue. And then I also think it's important to note that like this is a memoir. This is not journalism. So I read some interviews with the editorial team, and while, from what it sounds like, while Sarah submitted the book with a lot of notes and documentation that are not in the book, nobody fact checked this book. So it is definitely like her first person account of her experiences and other people's experiences, because she talks about like what the people around her are going through as they're doing it. So just wanted to put all of that out there as our introduction to Careless People. And then I'd love to hear, Taylor, anything that stood out to you from the first half of the book. What's your take so far?
So many things. So the reason Amelia is referencing the first half of the book is because I opened up my Kindle. I am at exactly 50% of the way through. And there's so much to say. Your summation of it as reality TV, it is so that I was describing it. It feels very beach ready. And there's drama, and yet you feel some connection to the drama because all of our lives have been shaped in some way by Meta. So you're like, oh, I use that tool. Or, oh yeah, I remember when that thing happened and someone posted it on Facebook. So in some ways, it felt like a look back of how I engaged with the technology, and I found myself reflecting on that. The piece that I have been reflecting on is in the book, there is this tension in Facebook between Mark and the tech people and then everyone else who is headed by Cheryl. And you may remember, listener Amelia, you may remember this. Sheryl Sandberg had this big book called Lean In, and it was supposed to be about how women can do anything and you can have the family and you can also have the career. And I remember in my first corporate job, there were lean in circles, and we were talking about this as groups of women, how we could start to lean in and what that meant and looked like. So, to get a closer look at who Sheryl Sandberg specifically was as a person, and there are anecdotes about the author becoming a mother. Something that stood out to me that is just like, I cannot imagine, is she was breastfeeding at a certain point and they forced her to go someplace and her breasts are literally engorged and leaking. And no one wants to give her a break or acknowledge the fact that she needs to pump. And oh gosh, there are so many stories, but I like my boobs started hurting thinking about having to do an international flight, having to try and act like you are fine when you need to pump. And then her pump didn't work. And then she had to go find a pump. And then they end up accidentally thinking that she wants an escort or a sex worker to squeeze her boobs. It ends up being, there's some lightness to it, but the heaviness behind it is, oh yeah, Facebook, on one hand, Sheryl Sandberg made however many thousands, millions of dollars talking about leaning in, but structurally, they didn't care about women. What stood out to you, Amelia? This is like, I have highlights and highlights of stories that we could get into. So that's the one I'm leading with, but there's more there.
That one definitely stood out to me. Like, this book definitely makes a clear case for like Sheryl Sandberg's total hypocrisy in the way that she's like writing this book about leaning in. And then like essentially her way of like leaning in at Facebook, at least according to this book's account, is just to like do whatever she wants and exert her power as like power over everyone else, like the force of her will. And she like has all the Facebook staff like doing all these tasks for her book and her book tour, and like her public persona is like much seems to be a big part of like the work she make, like maintaining her public persona is a big part of the work that she makes other people do at Facebook, even though it's theoretically not related to Facebook. Like Lean In is not owned by Facebook or something like that. Okay, two things that stood out to me that I will just bring into this conversation. I was definitely reading through my lens of like, what are all of the ways that Facebook and now Meta are just like fucking with our privacy? Like the ways that they are just surveilling and taking all of our data. So the one early one that stood out to me is they talked about how like the head of growth at Facebook came up with the idea of like importing your contacts into Facebook, which I remember so clearly is like how you got friends, just like gave it access to all the phone numbers on your phone. And it was interesting reading this detail in the book. I'll just read it. I'm quoting here from page 62, where it says, Javi's team is the group that came up with the idea of importing your contacts into Facebook so Facebook could press non-users to join the service. In the beginning, they didn't ask permission to do this. You could tell Facebook, don't take my contacts, but then when you opened Messenger, they'd take them by default. And his team is instrumental in the development of the People You May Know tool, which is described by Mashable as Facebook's creepy as hell tool for its ability to make uncomfortable friend recommendations, such as when a sperm donor was recommended a biological child he never had. He had never met. Not he never had. A biological child he had never met. So I feel like that I was just like reading to soak up those kinds of details and to just get more and more examples, honestly, a little bit as like fuel to my fire of like Facebook will always do whatever it takes to get more and more users to pad its bottom line. And that's really the whole arc of the book is essentially we get Sarah Wynne Williams kind of charting this path of like her idealism around Facebook connecting the world, which is a lot of their original mission and what they claim to be working on. And then how that devolved when she saw the impact that it was having. And just like, I don't think she puts it in these words, but like the ruthlessness of venture capitalism and of the founders and directors of this company that want to make more money at all costs. And especially from her position as the head of global public policy, like she claims in the book to be bringing them these examples of like, we have literally cause these situations where people are dying. There is like so much hate speech. There's a genocide that's happened. Facebook is directly responsible for this, and the higher ups like don't care.
They really don't.
Really depressing to read. I was just like, even as someone who doesn't use Facebook tools anymore, I was like, wow.
So even though I've never built a venture-backed startup, partly because I don't like to be told what to do and I don't want to be beholden to growth at all costs. I have been in lots of environments that preach the concepts of move fast and break things, for example, which was popularized by Meta. And the examples you shared are totally like, of course, if I'm moving fast and breaking things, I'm going to import your contacts and not worry about it. The other problem that I have with VC too is that you are incentivized to be delusional, essentially. Like there's just a certain amount of delusion that you have to have as a founder who is trying to build a unicorn company. And then Facebook has well surpassed that. And now it's still this land grab. It's very colonial. I have to keep getting more and more and more. And what's interesting with Facebook is I see both sides of this. So on one hand, with venture capital, you'll have companies who are doing things that are just basic things that have always existed, and they're incentivized to make it sound brand new. Examples of this, Adam Newman's WeWork. It was renting office space, but then it had to be this whole like, we are having this office space operating system. No, bro, you're just like fractionally renting out space. Then you have other one to bring some other women into it, thinking about Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes, who is saying we're doing this crazy thing. So she's just believing that she can do it, and where people are instructed to paint a picture, whether or not that picture is true. What I find interesting about Mark Zuckerberg is that from a venture capital perspective, he had this gold mine, and I would say kind of stumbled around monetizing things. Now, ultimately, we have Meta to be this powerhouse in 2025. But as I was reading it, it was like, oh, why are you making these decisions that you're making? And at the root of it all, there's this moment where in the book where you can see this switch flip, and it started to become less about monetization. And it seemed like Zuck just got power hungry. There's this whole anecdote of how he becomes friends with a world leader and he sees the people mobbing for this world leader. And then he instructs the author to either organize a peace rally or a protest, a riot on his behalf. And that seems to be the point of demarcation, at least in what I've read so far, where Zuckerberg starts to shift from this like, I don't want to say bumbling idiot. He was always a smart guy, but started to be like, oh, this isn't just about me building a company that's profitable and is going to go to the moon. This is about me becoming a world leader and creating the world that I want to create, which is really a world in which people are land grabbing for resources. I'm curious what popped up for you as you saw, we talked about Sarah's evolution, but as you saw Zuck or Cheryl's evolution.
Yeah, I think that the book definitely affirms what I take to be the sort of like public take on Mark Zuckerberg, which is that like he has these pet projects that kind of suck. Like it seemed like the biggest one originally was, I think, the internet.org project, which was this sort of idea that Facebook was going to get new users by bringing the internet to countries that didn't have widespread internet access. And they pitched it as this sort of like public good. But really what they were doing was just trying to like give people phones that only had Facebook on them, or had Facebook and like a few government service websites on them to like get the governments to say yes to it. And eventually this failed because of the problems with the diplomacy, and also people who are really invested in like open internet access were like, this is not net neutrality. Like this is not what we're doing. Like when you say you're giving people internet, you can't just give them one website. But that was like a huge project that's focused on in the book. I'm imagining because it's a project that required a lot of global diplomacy and that is the author's specialty, but like it totally flopped. It did not happen except for in a few countries where eventually it was phased out. So I think that we see that and then we see like the present day like metaverse and like Zuckerberg trying to get everybody into the metaverse and like all the sort of virtual images of his avatar there, and like I just see people make fun of it on the internet, even people who aren't critical of social media. Like it just seems like as a leader he definitely will choose these projects that like don't make a lot of sense and often don't seem to pay off for the company at large. But I definitely do agree with you that like the book is making a case for the fact that he became very power hungry. And I think that there's also this case that like there is no coherent value set at the heart of Facebook except more users, more money. I guess those are the only things. And so the political affiliation of this company is just whoever's in power. They will bow down to them and try to get them on their side. Like, and that is apparent to all of us who know anything about Trump's elections and Cambridge Analytica and all of these other things. And she talks about that in the book as well, like the way that Facebook embedded people in the Trump campaign, supposedly like offered Hillary's campaign this as well, although the author seems skeptical of how clear that was. And at the same time, like the sort of the other thing that really struck me is just the duplicity in this book. Like the number of times throughout the book, and this comes up more and more in the second half, that Facebook is telling the public something, even straight up testifying in Congress about something that is untrue, completely false. And this comes up a lot around their attempts to move into China and what they claim they are doing to protect the privacy of Facebook users outside of China from the Chinese government, and then how that actually works. The author says like Facebook just straight up lied about this. Like they claim that the Chinese government cannot access the information of other users, and based on the technology that they are using, they absolutely can. And I just feel really depressed now. I'm just like we just have a government of liars. Our tech is all run by liars. Like I'm feeling bummed all of a sudden.
It's understandable to feel bummed. And yeah, you mentioned that formula of like more users, more money. And you saw this in the book where they get their first billion and they were like, that's the billion users. Now we got to get everyone else. And that's where internet.org comes from. And now they have how many billions of users? And it's like, okay, how can we get more money from them? We need more attention from them. We need to sell more things to them. So it's this never ending cycle of more, more, more. And we live on a planet that has somewhat finite resources. Not to be realistic, not to say, oh, I'm living in a scarcity mindset. No, there's just an amount of water on the earth. There's an amount of people on the earth. And what if we didn't need to continually have more? But that's the problem that I have with VC is VC is never interested in saying this is enough. It's always saying we need to expand into more and what they would say are better things, but what lead to a lower quality of living for people. I would love to bring it back to the women in the story though, like the author and to Cheryl, because something I really admire about our friendship is you don't like to talk shit about people, especially women. And something that I find myself navigating as I look at this is what is the valid criticism of Sheryl Sandberg, or I brought up Elizabeth Holmes, and then what is the criticism that gets exacerbated because it is gendered and because they're women? Because realistically, Sheryl Sandberg actually didn't really do anything different than her male counterparts. She was just a woman who proclaimed to be helping other women, but really she was just upholding the status quo, I guess. So that's kind of my take on Cheryl is she, and we see this with other waves of feminism and white feminism and the different things, but it's like, okay, this is a new era, but really the new era is the old era but I'm just telling you that you're allowed to confine yourself to the same systems that we operate in. And you should be so excited that you now have these 11 principles that tell you how to live in like a patriarchal, heteronormative, racist, all of the things society.
Oh yeah. It's like, cool, I built you a really nice prison and you can live there and call it freedom. The Sheryl Sandberg story. No, I mean, I think that's a really interesting point and I appreciate it. I feel like it's challenging to talk about because I actually will pretty gladly talk shit about Sheryl Sandberg. And I think part of that is because of my analysis of like the power dynamics, right? Like she has as much power as I think that a woman can have or did have at Facebook, as much power as a woman could have in a VC startup scenario. And I also think that if she had not written a book about feminism, I may have been a little more sympathetic to a sort of like, she's just like playing the man's game, like becoming powerful. Like, there's definitely this moment, right, where when someone claims to be a feminist or claims something is feminist, I like lean in and I'm kind of like, okay. And sometimes I think that's important because we do get, especially in white feminism, we get these things that I think are actually anti feminist called feminist. And I'm like, wait. No, this word doesn't mean nothing. Like the word feminist means something to me, and how it is deployed and used is important to me. So, like, I think there's some of that going on. But I also think what you're pointing to is like often when someone calls themselves a feminist publicly, it like raises the amount of criticism they receive, and it's not always helpful, and it can like totally deter them from the positive work that they are or may be doing. So I like to try to give people a lot of credit for their intentions and for their impact when they're having it, but I also know that I just have to be discerning, especially if someone is calling themselves or something feminist. Like, I'm going to at least try to figure out if I think it's feminist before I have a sort of like take on what they're doing. So yeah, I don't know. I think there's like the power is important. And then there's also this sort of question, it goes into the impact of question of like, for the sake of what? Like, as far as I can tell, Lean In was only for the sake of Sheryl Sandberg's enrichment, like literal wealth building. I don't think it actually, I mean, there was a foundation involved. So I guess probably she did give away some money, but like really seemed to just all be about her. And that's not something that I'm really interested in upholding as like feminism. But I hear you on like, there's that moment where because it's called feminist, I lean in and sometimes I get even more critical. But I do try to do a lot of like giving people credit for what they're trying to do, even as I'm being critical of their work.
And I will say part of why I brought this up is because I sent you this article that's called Why We're Missing the Girl Boss After Burning Her at the Stake. And they talk about Sheryl Sandberg, they talk about Kamala. And I mean, you and I, a couple of years ago, were having a lot of conversations about girl boss and what that meant to us. We are both people who, I'll say you can tell me if you did or not, but like I had the girl boss book. I identified as someone who's like trying to build something. At the time, I probably would have told you I was trying to build an empire, which now I'm like, ugh. But that's how I felt. And I went the full cycle of, oh no, that's not how I want to identify. But I feel some of the tension being someone who enjoys work, is prolific, likes to put things into the world. And as someone who ran a self-care company, I felt my own tension of, oh, I'm this person who likes to birth things, who sees my career as a big part of my life. And am I not allowed to do that anymore? Is it bad if I have aspirations? So I felt my own tension with the term girl boss that, thank God, I hope no one would compare me in Sheryl Sandberg. But I would guess that Sheryl Sandberg is an Enneagram 3. A 3 or an 8 is my guess. Like, she has ambitions. The woman has ambitions. I don't know if I would say I have ambitions, but I have a lot of things that I can do and would like to do that don't involve overthrowing governments. So that wasn't a coherent, like, here's what I'm asking. It's more just, this is where my mind is at as I was posing that question to you. And I'm wondering what it brings up for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't honestly remember if girl bloss blur gloss. I can't remember if girl boss was like a title I felt a kinship with. I think because I've never had a corporate job and hadn't really ever had like a traditional boss, I didn't quite know what to do with it. Like I didn't reject it, but I just was like, I don't know. I'm a grad student. Can I be a girl boss? I don't. But like obviously, or maybe not obviously, but we were both members of the wing. I very much bought into that sort of like aestheticized feminism as a brand sort of movement. And so I can definitely like own that. And I think that has shifted for me in a lot of ways. I thought was what I thought was really interesting about the piece that you sent, and we'll link it in the show notes as always, was kind of where they ended, which is this claim I think they're trying to make that there is this sort of nostalgia for the girl boss now because at least when we had girl bosses, there were girls at the table, there were women at the table. And now we're looking at leadership in major companies and the US government, and women are more absent than ever. Or like the examples we get are people who just horrify me, like our NSA director. But anyway, um, so I do understand that claim. Like, do I actually want there to be girl bosses again? No. But do I see the ways that the women who are at the helms of these companies, like The Wing, like Outdoor Voices, like, Sophia Amoruso, the girl boss herself, like, I see the ways that they were torn down for things that men in their positions or similar positions were never torn down for. And I take that seriously. That's where I am trying to figure out, like, I do want to give a lot of credit to women who are trying to do something. And not all those women call what they were doing feminist at all. Like, not, I think that is again where like Sheryl Sandberg really picks at my uh, neuroses or like my thing, like the things I like to care about. But I think we have to kind of hold a both and here of like, I am not nostalgic for the broken system that we live within and that the girl bosses were powerful within, but I also want women to have power. And I wonder if women have to have power in these systems in order to enact the change that we need to have different systems. Like, I think it's really complicated. And I am more interested in the women who are finding and claiming power in government than maybe I am those who are like going the venture capital route because it just seems so precarious to me there that like you just enrich yourself and build your own personal wealth and do nothing else. But that's like a soft idea. I haven't really thought that through before.
Yeah, I would love to have this be something that we revisit because the other thing that occurs to me is yes, maybe women aren't at these tables that oftentimes are only nominally interested in them. I actually was just having a conversation with my mom who's on the tail end of her career like, "Mom, have you ever heard of the glass cliff? And is that something you feel like you've experienced if you're not familiar with the glass cliff? It's where a woman is promoted to leadership at a really precarious time in the organization's history. So like maybe they'll succeed, but also everyone kind of thinks it's downhill anyway. So we might as well throw in a woman or a minority, often both. And we can say we're doing great things, but really we thought this was a sinking ship. So let's just look good to the public as the ship sinks. Um, so the reason why I'm interested in exploring that is because in these places where we're supposed to want to aspire to being the CEO of a Fortune 100 or being on the board of a big company, what if women are succeeding in other smaller ways? And by smaller, I only mean in terms of dollars or in terms of the number of people who would know. Like, people don't necessarily know that you are the owner of your company, and yet you have built this beautiful ecosystem around you. So what if women are leading, but they're leading in ways that aren't as apparent to the powers that be or to what mainstream society would say is valuable? And that's like an interesting question is exciting to me. It feels really mycelial to me that there could be this network of women who are gaining power, creating power, sharing power. And the billionaires better watch out because when we decide to exercise it in a way that really overturns their systems, they'll be caught off guard. So again, this feels really pencil thinking to me, but it gets me excited about possibilities, and it's something I would love to like really dig in with you when we both had more time to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we should definitely have thought of you the Women in Power episode. Because it's yeah, this is something I think about all the time as well in my business growth and audience building journey. And it's, how do I build to the extent that I can, like plant seeds in places that I feel like are just kind of like refusing the norms. And obviously, like I am planting in soil that exists in the systems we live in, if I'm going with this metaphor. But like, yeah, it's like I just I've had no interest in getting a seat at those tables. So what else am I doing? And I want to think more about like the value I see in trying to get women at those tables and what I think might happen. And of course, I admire people I see doing that work, like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, or in a very different way, not a woman, Bernie Sanders.
I was also going to add Kat Abu. She's a YouTuber and a TikTok star who in Evanston is actually trying to overturn the Democratic, I believe it's representative, who has just been there. Her whole campaign is, what if Democrats didn't suck? And she's like, I've built this power on the internet. I've been talking about leftist themes on the internet. I want to translate that into power in the government. So she's the person I'm watching. Anyway, I interrupted you. Continue.
No, that's so interesting. Yeah, it's like I think there are different paths, but the one for me is definitely like I am not oriented toward the state. I'm trying to like build in other ways in other places. And also I feel like I just have to say as we wrap this up, like even just the word women, like when we talk about women as a singular entity, it's just such a misnomer to me, right? Like it encapsulates so many different kinds of people. And that, I mean, I think that comes up too. Like there are certainly women in power in Trump's government. They're just ones that I deeply disagree and misalign with, right? So I don't think that just like having a woman in power is ever an answer. Like because being a woman does not come with an inherent set of values or beliefs or actions that I agree with. So, or that actions that benefit other women, quite frankly. So, yeah. Next episode, we'll just do a quick circle back on women, TM. We'll figure this out between now and then. We can do it.
I believe in us.
Okay, I feel like we're ready to move on to our next topic. Now that we have tackled Careless People by Sarah Wynne Williams, we'll link to the book in the show notes. If you've read it, like please talk to me about it. Talk to me and Taylor about it. Put it in the comments on Substack. We will discuss with you. But let's move into our next topic. This is kind of like actually thought of you like the media episode because we're going to talk about something tangentially related to this, which is books and AI and pirating books and all of these things. So Taylor, do you want to take us into our next topic?
Absolutely. So speaking of meta, I sent you this article from The Atlantic, which I mean, every major media company, I'm just having such mixed feelings about. So this is not an endorsement of The Atlantic by any means, but they use this platform called LibGen, which is you can get pirated books there, you can upload books there, you can download books there. And story is that Meta took the books that were uploaded there and used it to train their own AI system. And as this is coming out, authors are having feelings about it. I searched immediately. First thing I did was search my book, search your book, and was like, hey, we're in here.
Yeah.
Is this play about us? It is about us to a certain extent, and figuring out what does that mean? How do we feel about it? I'm still figuring out how I feel about it. I think I had seen someone else, it might have been OpenAI, don't quote me on this, who had also used pirated books, so I was aware that my stuff was out there. I also think at one time I may have asked ChatGPT to write something in my style because we both have things on the internet, both transcripts of podcasts as well as actual blog posts as well as books. So I'm not under any assumptions that like if someone wanted to clone my voice, there are hundreds of hours of episodes that you could use to make something that sounds passably like me. But just to see it in my face as I'm reading the book Careless People and all of the things that Facebook and Meta have done, it just it made it hit even closer to home. And then of course I put it in the group chat. And what were your initial thoughts, Amelia?
So when you sent it to me, honestly, my first thought was like, I am not surprised. Like it felt, I think because I had already like gotten a little bit or like was reading the press around Careless People, I was like, of course, Meta just did what they wanted. And as you read the article, it's essentially like they got quotes from publishers. They knew how to do this legally. They were just like, that costs way too much money. That's like not tenable for us to spend that money, which to be clear, they have that much money. They just didn't want to spend it on this. It was too expensive to them because they didn't want to spend any money. So they chose to just use all of the books in LibGen, which I believe stands for Library Genesis, if you're curious what we're saying. And, you know, I had familiarity with LibGen because when I was in grad school, that was essentially like the like grad student whisper network was like, go find the books you need here because academic texts are notoriously expensive. I mean, you can have books. There were books I needed for my dissertation that cost like $300 for a 200-page book. And of course, like you try to access it through the library, which I did, and I used all of my interlibrary loan privileges. But also, often, even if I would get the book itself, I wanted a searchable PDF version because I wanted to be able to just like control F for, you know, the 2 paragraphs about the thinker that I was writing about in this book that I needed to cite. And I didn't want to have to read the whole book to figure out where it was if it wasn't indexed or something, you know? So I feel like I had that familiarity and I was like, yeah, this exists. And it was something that as a grad student, I kind of felt like books are super expensive. I am paid so far under minimum wage. I have no money. I didn't really have any moral qualms like looking for these texts there. Also, academics don't make their money from their book publications, so I didn't feel like I was taking money out of anybody's pocket necessarily by doing that. But as a writer, I just kind of stopped using it because I'd rather just buy the books and support other writers. And also, I just get them from the library if I don't want to buy them. And if I can't do either of those, I just have other things I want to read. So it kind of has just not been something that's been on my radar for a few years. So I was intrigued to see one, sort of this be shared around in a public way where like so many people were finding out about it for the first time when it just felt to me like, yeah, this has been around forever. And then the other thing that came up for me that I shared with you is that my first job in high school and after high school was for Duke University Press. So I worked at a university press. And I guess actually, if money's being taken out of anybody's pocket around me downloading academic books, it's theirs. Like they're the people who need to make money from these things. But I worked there. So I very clearly remember the Google Books lawsuit that happened, I don't even know, 15 years ago now, 10 years ago now, which was a lawsuit brought by presses and libraries because Google had just sent people to check out books and scan them. Like you can actually see people's hands on some of the Google Library images or the Google Books images. Like they were just scanning books from libraries and putting them online. And so all these presses sued. And one of my jobs pretty early on at the press was to create a list of our books that were on Google Books. So I was like kind of remembering that I had done this. I had not thought about this in years. And I was like, whatever happened with all of that? And I looked it up and it was like a lawsuit that took over 10 years and then it sort of settled and some presses sort of got some money from Google. And so I think when I read that, I was like, first of all, who's anybody going to sue? Because I also learned that people have tried, like the federal courts in the US have injunctions against LibGen, but nobody knows who owns it or where it's based. And it doesn't seem to be based in the US. So like suing them doesn't really seem like an option. And then 2, I was like, who's going to benefit from this? Not authors. It's the publishers who will get any money that comes in. And that money, I don't think will benefit me. That's my belief.
Yeah, no, where I ended up was a similar place to you, but his last name is Carney. I'm forgetting his first name. I see him a lot on Threads and Blue Sky. He does a lot of commenting on the wellness space, talks about Andrew Humerbin, some of the shady stuff that he does. So I just in kind of in the vein of conspirituality, but I'd say more of like looking a little bit more at mainstream folks. Anyway, he was saying that you can get up to 100 something thousand per copyright infringement. So his plan, and he has, I think it's like a significant number. I have one book that's in there. He had a bunch of articles as well as published books in there. So he felt like it was worth it to try and sue. Now, from my perspective, though, I'm like, great. So I could maybe get $100,000. Maybe they settle outside of court and I get $50,000. The lawyer would take 25 to 30% of that. And how many years is it going to take? So if I get maybe $20,000, $30,000, but it takes 10 years, there are just other ways that I could make $3,000 a year, even if I want to stick it to Meta. But it was interesting that at least this specific person is exploring a path to suing Meta specifically as an individual whose copyright work has been violated. So if other people are listening and you want to search and see if your published works are there and if you want to go the route of suing, more power to you. Just didn't fully feel like my bag.
Yeah, I guess I am like very cynical on this. And this is maybe a defeatist attitude. I will own that. Like, I think because of everything I've learned about the Google Books experience, like, I just don't think people are going to get paid out. And because of everything I read in Careless People, I'm like, Meta will just fight it forever. And I'm like, no, thank you. I would rather
No.
just like, I don't know. If there was a class action lawsuit people put together, I would certainly like join on to it. I think what Meta has done is horrible. I hate that they just count on the fact that they are big enough and powerful enough to break these laws and infringe on people's rights. I also think that like there are so many question marks around the legality of what's being pulled into and used by generative AI that will become like another sinkhole for these sorts of lawsuits, right? Like there's so much visual work that's been ripped off by these models as well. And I'm intrigued to see, or hopeful to see perhaps, to get out of my cynicism, defeatist attitude, like what power do we have as the people who create things? And I just don't know that like that power comes through suing Meta necessarily. Like what are other ways to assert power and like refuse these types of things that maybe aren't just about like a class action lawsuit that takes 10 years to settle?
Yeah. And another alternative viewpoint that I brought into our conversation, we're having Dr. Price here for a second time in our conversation, was this idea like why do we and do we have to assert power over our work? Like is anything truly ours? And Dr. Price in this Instagram post that we'll share in the show notes just said, yeah, like feel free to take my ideas, remix them, etc. Nothing's fully mine, which feels like a very spiritual perspective. And it's funny, I remember when I was writing the inner workout book and then I sent it to someone to read and said, oh, this like feels reminiscent of some concepts that I've been developing. And it wasn't a territorial thing that they said at all. The way that I talk about it is, yeah, we're just dipping from the same well. It's the same thing of when I was talking about, oh, I want to memorize poetry and I think that would be so beautiful. And then 2 hours later, I see something about the power of poetry. So, on one hand, I think it's really valuable to develop intellectual property. And for the type of person that I am and my skill set, I do think that's a way to like build wealth. But I'm also very open to being critical and skeptical of needing to claim things as mine and what is at the root of that. I would hope, though, that in Dr. Price's invitation that people take their stuff, that it would be cited. And it would be, I was inspired by Dr. Price to do this, and here's how I did it. And that's what people, and especially generative AI, struggle to do. So I don't know. We're getting really into some moral and ethical philosophy stuff here of is anything really ours? I don't know. I mean, to quote scripture, I told you all, it's just in my head, is meaning like everything has already existed. There are no new ideas. I actually wrote my college essay about this, about how there's nothing new underneath the sun. So we think we're trying to be all innovative and stuff, but maybe we're just like the VC bros and we're doing something that was already done. But if we put our spin on it, then we're what? We're able to make more money. We're smarter. We're like, what's the point of it?
Yeah, we're all just Uber reinventing the bus. You know, what's really coming up for me as like my kind of final thought on that is like it really does come back to power, right? It's like Meta has so much power that they can just do this. And they know or trust that they will either like not face any consequences or be able to like outspend and outlast them. And I'm also thinking about Dr. Price's like sort of statement, and I'm like, well, I think in the ethos of it, I agree, but I can also recognize it would feel super different if, you know, like a rich, famous influencer author swiped some of my work and put it in their book than it would if like a peer or a follower like shared it on their Instagram. You know what I mean? Like there's just because of the power dynamic differential. And I think that that's something I'm really taking away from this episode is that like there's power in ideas, there's power in attention, and that power is distributed in a lot of different ways across our society. Obviously, this is a very basic statement, but I think it's just really showing up in these different things we're talking about. And it's really coming to light how much power we have given these tech companies by giving them our data and our attention. Yikes.
Yikes, indeed. We have been pretty heavy. We're still continuing our media extravaganza, and you ended talking about power, and the three shows that we're about to talk about in this next segment all have an element of power inherent in them. So we're going to talk about three shows that we've both been watching: Severance, Paradise, White Lotus. There may be spoilers, so be forewarned right now. We're going to talk at a high level about what the show is. We will add timestamps. So if you want to see how long we're talking about each show, if you want to skip forward, you can do that. But like we just wanted to be no holds barred. Let us talk about something and not be worried about like, wait, would you know that if you only watch season one? Our brains can't do all of that work today. Like we said, we've had hard months. So let's talk about power. Let's talk about prestige TV. And of course, if we're saying the words prestige TV, we have to start with Severance. So I'm going to let you take it away. What is Severance for the uninitiated, Amelia?
Severance is a show on Apple TV, which you will have to get to watch it because I have to get Apple TV every time there's a new season. No, so Severance is a show about. We'll start with at the corporate level. It's about a corporation called Lumen, and Lumen does things. It's not entirely clear to any of us exactly what their business is. But what they're known for in the world of Severance is that they've created this procedure where people can have their brains severed so that you are one person when you are not at work and you are a different person when you are at work. Sort of like there's two halves to your brain, there's two versions of you. So when you ride the elevator into work each day, you kind of like have this moment where you become someone else. Like when the doors open, you are one version of yourself. And when you go back and ride the elevator and you get out into the parking lot the next day, you are the other version of yourself. And you don't have a memory of like what each version does not have contact with the other. So that's why it's fully severed. And we meet our main character, Mark. Every like all the white mid names, even to me, I'm like, is it Mark? Is it Joe? It's Mark. In this show, it's Mark. Mark is severed, works at Lumen. His job is like looking at numbers on a screen and putting some of them together, essentially, quite literally. That's like what he does all day. And we learn in season one that he's like taken this job because his wife died and he like is overcome by grief. He cannot handle the grief of it. So he's like, all I want is this time each day when I go to work and I literally am someone else who didn't know her. And throughout season one, we learn more about Lumen. We meet people who work at this office, and there's a huge spoiler at the end of season one, which is that Mark's wife is actually alive at Lumen. The other spoiler at the end of season one is that one of Mark's coworkers, Helly, actually is the daughter of the man who owns the company. So she's kind of like a plant. And that's a huge cliffhanger. And like when I watched the first season, I was like, this is amazing. This is the smartest. Like I never saw it coming. I was so fucking in. But season two opens where like the innies, as they're called, the show is so hard to summarize briefly, I'm realizing as I try to do it. The innies who work in Lumen have jailbreaked themselves to the outside world, essentially. They like become outies. They go to this, Helly goes to a party where she like exposes that she's an innie. Mark goes to a family party where he like screams she's alive. And we end season one, and at the start of season two, we're back in the office. And we have to figure out like, why is everybody back? Or why is just Mark back? Who are these other people? Is everybody coming back? What's happening here? And a lot of shit happens in season two, but sometimes I felt like not much happened in season two. So maybe I'll pause there. Taylor, is there anything I like missed in my recap of season one or the premise of Severance? And also, what did you think of season two?
No, I think that was a good world building. Yeah, it's interesting because it both feels futuristic, and also if you look at their cars and their tech, it looks like it's from the 80s or 90s. It's the set design is just really incredible. In terms of what I thought about season two, I feel like I liked it more than you did. It did feel like I called it a rebuilding year in the sense of, in I would say of the two of us, I'm the more acclimated to sports, but I'm by no means a sports person. But
Yeah.
I imagined it as like, okay, we have this amazing season, and then there's more amazing things to come. But in order for me to know what's going to happen in season three or four, I need to understand more about these characters, and I need to understand more about this world. And I felt like this season did such a good job of now Gemma, Mark's wife, Gemma, Mark's wife, gets you see her as not just Mark's wife. She is this person who has her own interest in stories and trauma that she has to deal with. Miss Selvage slash Cobell, who is Mark's boss in season one, you understand more of her backstory. Even Helly slash Helena Egan, the daughter of the boss, you get to understand her more. My favorite character is Mr. Milchick, who I can't decide if I think he's the victim or the villain. He seems very much like
Yes.
he has Stockholm syndrome, and I also appreciate the way that they started to bring race into the conversation this season. Last season, and it's been a while since I watched it, felt a lot more almost Bridgerton-esque, as in like, okay, we just have people of all races and race isn't an issue here. And then in season two, you're seeing some of the dynamics I felt of like looking at the other Black people and thinking, are you feeling the way that I'm feeling right now? And so Mr. Milchick is my character that I want to watch in upcoming seasons. I'm also deep into the Reddit thread, so there's lots of conspiracy theories about, is he actually working with the resistance and like subtly sabotaging Lumen? I don't know. I think he is an incredibly handsome man, and I like to see his character unfold.
And he can dance. That's something we learned by the end of season two. Yeah, I really appreciate all of those insights. And I feel like I agree with you on the rebuilding season. My version of that, not being a sports person, is like middle book syndrome. Like I feel like the middle book in a trilogy is always just like trying to get us to the payoff of the series. And that's a little bit how I felt about this. So I will definitely be watching season three because I want to see like, do we get that sort of like big reveal or something that opens up for us? Or does it go like I kind of think of different trajectories for shows. Some of them start with sort of like the big picture and they just get like more and more into the minutia mundanity of the worlds. And I think this could happen in their season three. Or we could have kind of like done what you're saying, done all this world building in season two, which will get us back to some like big event of season three or reveal or something that happens. And I'm really intrigued to see what they do. I think this show is really smart satire. Like it's really on this fine line of like, I read a piece somewhere that was like, this is the fetishization of the office and of corporate culture. Like, is Severance in love with an office or in hate with the office as a workplace? Right. I think there are these questions. And I'm so intrigued to see like what happens next. So even though I felt like I wanted more of something in season two, I still feel very excited about season three. And I will say, actually, weirdly enough, my favorite episode though was one of the ones that did not take place in an office. It was when they went on their like office trip, their like excursion. I was like, what is happening?
When they saw the biggest waterfall in the world.
Yes. I loved that episode, and it did have a big reveal in it. Like it felt like something really happened. How did you feel about the episode from like Miss Cobell's perspective, where she like goes to the small town and does the whole thing? I feel like I'm not bought in on her character the way they want me to be, which makes me wonder if something really big is coming from her in the future.
Yeah, it was definitely a slower episode. It was so beautifully shot, though. So even though nothing was happening, I was like, I am happy to just stare at the different hues of blue and gray and white. Like, yes, the all of the settings, but also everyone had like white hair, blue eyes,
Yeah.
white skin. Like it was just a very aesthetically um cohesive framework. I did feel empathy for her, seeing the relationship between her and her aunt, and also just like she has some unhealed issues, like majorly unhealed issues. Again, for me as someone who grew up in religion, seeing the ways that she was trying to force herself into this, and someone online, multiple people online have pointed out that at the end of that episode, you find out that she's the person who's actually invented this severance procedure. She is this woman who did this, and actually, it seems like she was pretty young. She might have been a teenager at the time that she did this. She builds this incredible procedure. She has to give a sacrifice to Kier. Kier is like their god, but really it's the descendant of, or not the descendant, the forefather of the now head of the company in Egan. And she puts those plans into the head. And that visual of, I did this thing as a woman and I'm sacrificing it to fill the empty head of a man. It was just very visceral. And when I saw someone have that analysis, it's just like, oh yeah, that feels relatable. Having to, especially in office culture, feeling like you have to literally fold yourself into whatever the leader, and the leader often happens to be a man, into their mind, their way of seeing the world. So I still don't trust her, but I have a lot more empathy for her and where she's coming from, both as a woman trying to navigate a more traditional workplace and also someone who was indoctrinated as a child and told, like, you have to engage with the world this way. Otherwise, we don't know the total dynamics, but otherwise, you might not go to heaven. Otherwise, you might XYZ. That's scary. Like, I used to have anxiety attacks as a child because I was afraid that I was going to go to hell because I hadn't like said the right prayer or because I sinned in a way that was unforgivable. So that touched on some things that just really resonated with me.
She's definitely the most likely to write Careless People person, like the most likely to write the full of drama memoir about what happened at this company. I'm very intrigued to see if she gets a redemption arc or not, or how they like victim or villain is also, I think, a real question mark in her character as well. So, yeah, if you watch Severance, we would love to know what you thought about it, season two or season one. And we also want to talk about another show that was like my sleeper hit of the year. This is a first season. To me, it came out of nowhere. And you were the first person to tell me about it, Taylor. So, what did you think of Paradise?
Okay. What did I think about it? Sleeper hit is a good way to talk about it. Truly, I was getting my hair done. It is an all day experience. Most of the time, I think I'm going to do reading for school, but occasionally they'll put something on TV and I'm just locked in. So, my hairstylist has very different tastes than me. She'll be watching these shows that are so intense, and I'm like, I don't need to see 50 gazillion people get killed on the way to that. Like, this is too much. She puts the show on. I think she started at episode 4 or something. And I'm trying to concentrate on my reading. I look up and I'm like, wait, wait, wait. Is this episode 1? And she starts chuckling. She's like, no, it's not. Do you want me to run it back for you? And then from that point on, I was locked in. So, the first thing that you need to know, the main character of this show is Sterling K. Brown. At his best, most pensive, brooding, protective. And you are in this world that seems very much like ours. Except as the show goes on, you realize that the world has ended. And it took me a fair bit into the first episode to realize that Sterling K. Brown, who is the head of the Secret Service for James Marsden, who is the president in the show, is actually not in the White House as we know it. They're in this White House underground in this place called Paradise. And pretty quickly in the first episode, you learn that the president, again, James Marsden, has been assassinated and chaos ensues. The show is looking at a lot of things. Like the questions, the themes that I noticed were we've talked a lot about power, who gets to hold power. You learn that only about 25,000 people are in this paradise, people who were chosen to, as there was some climate catastrophe, a major climate catastrophe that kind of cascaded across the globe, these people were chosen to go to paradise. And they've created this sense of security and attempted to create normalcy to the point that there's a fake sky that the sun rises and sunsets, even though they are inside of a mountain. And so the show is exploring figuring out who killed the president, as well as figuring out what's actually happening in this world. Has the world ended? And who benefits kind of from keeping this paradise world as it is? And then the person who produced it is the same person who produced This Is Us. I didn't watch that show, but I saw all the jokes about people crying from episodes, and it very much is that one that is in the same vein. It's exploring relationships. It tugs at your heartstrings, even as the world is ending and there's been an assassination. And you're like, oh my gosh, she has a crush on this boy. Oh my gosh, this teenage boy lost his dad. So it is hard to sum up shows. I was going to say the TLDR, but that was the long and everything I wanted you to know. So there you go.
Yes. Okay. I'm just going to say that if you have not watched Paradise, I need you to either decide you're not going to watch it or skip ahead to hear us talk about the next show, because I want to talk about some of the decisions they make about how the world ended and who killed the president that were fascinating to me. But if you know them before you watch the show, I think you won't find it as satisfying. So this is red alert spoiler time. If you think you will ever watch this show, skip ahead, please, and watch it and then come back and you can hear my takes. So I'm going to come in strong and say that I think the penultimate episode of season 1, episode 7, the episode where the world ends, is a perfect episode of television to me. And I loved that they made us wait for it. To get 6 episodes in and still not know how the world ended exactly, really fucked with me. I was really trying to figure it out. And when we finally got that episode, which is essentially the day the world is ending, we follow Sterling K. Brown's character through his day and his realization that his wife is going to get left behind. And we see all the people who worked with the president who did not get picked for Paradise and their reactions. I mean, you had texted me previously to be this show is so intense. I had to take a bath after I watched it before I could go to bed. And even thinking about that episode now, I literally have goosebumps. It was so intense. And I just thought so well done. I was so impressed. I don't know. What did you think of it, Taylor?
I don't even have words for how it was just masterfully done. And also, part of this is the fact that it's a future that's not too far off for us. Severance is very theoretical. We don't know if there's ever going to be this severance procedure. I hope there isn't. But this is oh, climate catastrophe could happen at any time. There are climate catastrophes. I can't even, I'm so worked up. There are climate catastrophes that are happening every month. at some place in the world. And so part of it was not just the emotions of seeing people realize this is their last day, but also this could be us tomorrow. This could be us in 5 to 10 to 25 years.
Yeah, it felt so intense. And I think something that also really brought the intensity in for me is like when we start the day with the president and like we watch him have to make the call that it's time to go to paradise. So that sort of questioning of like, is this really it? Like, is this the end? Do we need to be on the plane there because the final disaster is here? Like, that really got me because I was like, how will we know? And then also the president like records a message for the people that's kind of telling them everything's going to be okay. And there's this whole part where he's like, no, I have to go back and tell them it is not. And that like they need to get to their people. Like this is the end. He's like, we've decided it. I'm going to tell them this. And that really like stressed me out. And then I also think it's worth saying, I was so curious, like, what did these people decide was going to be the end of the world? Because I was like, is it climate? Is it nuclear war? Is it, and like, spoiler, it's both. So essentially what happens in the show, and again, this is why I was like, don't listen to this if you haven't seen it. But what happens is there is like an underground volcano in Antarctica that erupts and like breaks up the ice cap. Is that the
Shelf.
word I
Yeah.
want? The ice shelf, and it causes this tsunami that totally takes out the southern hemisphere. Like Australia is gone. Anything below the equator is gone. And they say it's going to like be a tsunami potentially like up past Florida, but also like the way that the water will travel. There are scientists who are like saying that it's just going to like roll all the way up to the North Pole and then tsunami back essentially. So we have this climate catastrophe. And then as that is happening, various world powers, especially those who have nuclear weapons, go to war to try to secure the resources that may remain available. So there's then like a border war between China and Russia, and the United States has to decide if they're going to send out all of their nukes, our nukes. Is it our nukes if this is like a fictional TV show? I don't know. I guess I should, oh, I don't know, whatever. But I was like locked in to see what they were going to decide. And the scene where the reporter in Jakarta is like, we're on top of the highest building here and we think we'll be okay. And then we watch the wave come in. I don't even have words. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see this. Like, I can't even handle it, how intense it was. It's like my top TV episode of the year for sure. Already locked in. I pick that one.
It's hard. It's going to be so hard to top. It was just so well done. And like I said, it felt really close to home. The other element that I wanted to bring in is at the beginning of this year, two things. I told a lot of people to watch Paradise. Like me and my parents, we have pretty different TV taste. And somehow this ended up in the middle of our Venn diagram. And we all loved Paradise for different reasons. The other thing that I was sending to a lot of people was this YouTube video about how tech billionaires basically want to take over the world and remake countries in their own image. And in Paradise, the woman who is in charge, almost the shadow president, is a billionaire who, yay for equality, I guess. Like she got the seat at the table of being the villain in the show. But it was this sense of, it felt real again because I'm seeing the playbook that tech billionaires who have said we want to remake American society and the world in our vision of what we think the world should be. I'm seeing that play out in real time. And then I'm watching a TV show where this tech billionaire is trying to make everything seem like it's normal. And this place is so good for you. And we're doing all of these things so that you feel like you're living above ground. And one of the scenes in the show is they program the sky to say they're lying to you. And it just felt so relevant when I think of all the people who voted for Trump, voted for Republicans because they felt like he's going to take care of us. He's going to lower the price of our groceries. He's going to bring things back to make America great again, whatever the fuck that means. And they're lying to you. They don't actually care about you. They care about a world where they use their billions of dollars to control the resources and only allow you to live in it if you are benefiting them. It's like getting back to feudalism. They call it techno feudalism. So that was another thing that was, it just kept pulling at me as I watched it. It's like, this is a worst case scenario for us. And we're actually on the path to that techno feudalism now.
Woof. Yikes. Bummer.
Sorry.
Those are my refrains for this episode. The one about power, bummer edition. Yeah, for sure. But I mean, so true. And I mean, that has me thinking back to what I was saying earlier. Like, my first bummer was just about how everyone in power is a liar. And I just don't know what to do that with that. And we saw that replicated here. And one of the big lies that comes out in the show is that everyone in paradise is told that no one outside of paradise could have survived, but there are survivors. And they sent people to the surface to see the conditions. And those people tried to bring a survivor back. And so they shot them all. They were like, we are hard locked in on this narrative that there's no one surviving outside of paradise. And so we cannot let this come out. And they murdered these people instead of like let a survivor in or acknowledge that there were survivors even. So I think that I said I was going to spoil who killed the president, but I'm going to leave that open unless you really want to talk about it. Maybe there's one spoiler I won't give for this episode.
No,
and people,
let's leave that.
Yeah. So if you want to watch, maybe we've convinced you. Maybe you needed to know how the world was going to end so you could handle the first 6 episodes. I also just want to say, like, I don't think that episode would have hit as hard if it was the first episode. Like, if I watched it first,
not.
It would have just been like, I would have been like, wow, this series is stressful. Maybe I'll opt out. But like, to have it be like a payoff for like learning so much, I thought was really great. And we have not spoiled episode 8 for you. So that is Paradise. Any other reflections on Paradise or techno-feudalism, which we should link the book that's called Techno-Feudalism in the show notes as well. It's a good one. Well, good in the sense of like depressing, but accurate.
Good in that it gives you information, not good in that it's good for your mental health. Well, let's talk about rich people who are a little lighter hearted. We're talking about millionaires instead of billionaires. Can you give us an entree into the world of White Lotus?
Yes. Okay. So I will admit that I was kind of a late comer to White Lotus. I was a holdout. I was like, satire about rich people at a resort. I don't know. But essentially, White Lotus, the name of the show, refers to, in the series, kind of like a chain of very, very high-end resorts across the world. So in season 1, we're at White Lotus Maui, so their Hawaii location. In season 2, we're in Sicily at an Italy location. And now in season 3, we are in Thailand at the White Lotus, Thailand. And across the seasons, there are these like kind of blips of continuity. And by the time we get to season 3, there's this 2 characters that are really kind of returning from seasons 2 or 1. And so each season we kind of get to meet a new cast, but maintain a bit of story from the previous seasons. And in this season in Thailand, we meet different groups of people. So that's kind of the fun of the premise of the show, is that like there are all of these, like it's just about the people who are at the resort at the same time and like events that unfold there. And I think each season opens up with a dead person. Like somebody has died. We're going to spend the whole season figuring out who died and who killed them. Hopefully we figure that out too. So in season 1, in season 3, we open with a shooting and a dead person at this resort in Thailand. I made a joke to JJ that we had like Chekhov's gunshots in episode 1. So like we're going to spend the whole series looking for the gun that caused these gunshots. And I enjoy that kind of premise, like the inversion of the premise a little bit, right? Like we didn't see the gun and wait for it to go off. Like we hear the gun go off and we have to wait to see the gun. I was kind of into that. But the sort of characters we meet, and Taylor, jump in if I forget a group of people. So we have this family from Durham, North Carolina that brings in a really fun UNC Duke rivalry moment that me and my UNC graduated spouse got really into. So we have this family. There's father who seems to be some type of like finance, hedge fund, venture capital, I don't really know, super rich businessy guy. His son who works for him, his daughter who is intended to be the sort of like free spirit, interested in Buddhism type, and his youngest son who is just graduating high school or just graduated high school, and then his wife who is Parker Posey with the wildest southern accent I have ever heard. So good. JJ and I like cannot handle her character. All time fave for sure. So we have that family at the resort. Then we also have this kind of famous TV actress played by Michelle Monaghan and her two friends from childhood. The three of them are there together, sort of on a vacation. And one is a celebrity. The other two are kind of, well, they're not celebrities. One seems pretty rich and wealthy. The other seems like she's going through a divorce and trying to figure out her life. Then we have a couple, we'll call them that. Rick, and I forget his girlfriend's name, which feels like by design.
Yeah, because I'm thinking of Chloe, but Chloe is the friend.
Yeah, the friend of
What is her
her.
name?
She's the one with the teeth. So
Yeah, I know
people talk
exactly
about
who
her.
she is. I just don't
Um,
know her name. I feel bad.
I know. So essentially, he is this like rich older man, and she is like a much younger woman. They are together. She is like, we are soulmates. There's this great scene where she's like, we're soulmates. And then a few moments later, she's like, you're a Scorpio who keeps secrets, and I'm an Aries who likes everything out in the open. And then he's like, I guess we're not soulmates then. And the astrology lover of me was like, this is fantastic. Thank you. So like they're there and like she is annoyed with him because he's on this whole other journey you learn about with like his dad. There's like he has a whole side plot, side mission of the season. And then there's also Chloe, who is this like very attractive, alluring woman who's actually living like up the hill or something at her boyfriend's mansion, and she just comes down to the resort to like go to the pool and eat at the restaurants. So they become friends. And her boyfriend is actually one of the characters who has come through each season. So we kind of recognize him. And I will not spoil exactly his role in the other seasons in case someone hasn't seen any of them, I suppose. And then the final character we have is Belinda. Is that her name?
I'm currently on a website to make sure that I keep everyone's names straight. So the character with the teeth, Chelsea, that's whose
Chelsea
name
and
we forgot.
Chloe. That's
Yeah.
Chelsea and Chloe are like the hot young girls who are dating old rich white men.
And then Belinda, you're right, is Natasha Rothwell's character. The only person of color. No, because all the Thai staff, but the only black person, I will say. Besides her son, who does come later.
Yes, Belinda and her son Zion. There is a sort of moment, I think, in the first or second episode where Belinda's like sees another older black couple there and they like sort of have an exchange and she's like talking to her son and she's like, I saw other black people here, and then makes a joke and like and they were guests and not staff, and she like kind of, so it's like commented on, like the racial dynamics here are definitely commented on. But Belinda works for White Lotus and at the Maui location, and it was a part of a whole plot of season one, and has come to this location to do a sort of like work exchange, culture exchange, it seems like, just like business exchange of like, here's how we do these things, here's how you do these things. And then am I forgetting any other? The staff also are some of the main characters. Maybe you can take it from me there, Taylor, because I don't know that I know anyone's names, which also feels kind of by design at a resort where the staff are meant to kind of disappear.
So you have what is Blue doing? Okay, sorry, I heard a noise and I thought it was Blue, but it's not Blue. Um, so Guy Talk is the security guard, and he has a love story-ish. It might be one-sided, we don't fully know yet, with
With Mook.
Mook, who also works at the hotel. So those are two of the, I would say those are the most important staff for you to know. Natasha Rothwell's character, Belinda, also has a love interest who is another massage therapist. So, and what's his name? Porn Chai. So, yeah, there's so many characters. Oh, there's also, did we talk about the Russians? There's the Russian guy, Valentin, who works there. And then later on in the season, you meet his two friends who go out with them and have some adventures as well. My guess is that they're going to come back or be exposed. They're already starting to be exposed in the end of the latest episode. So that's our cast of characters for this season. It's very much an ensemble show.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I feel like exploring who the characters are like kind of is the plot. Like that's the whole point of the show and each season of the show. And every season we're kind of like meeting these people and learning about their entanglements as we figure out what murder has taken place there. So I am already on record loving Parker Posey's character, whose name is Victoria. Do you have a favorite of the season or a few that you're like, I'm locked in on this group story?
Okay, I could not remember her name, but I do really like Chelsea. Chelsea is just like the chaos is happening, and she is just a resilient woman who is gonna figure it out and help people who are not the best people. No one on this show out I would say none of the guests on this show are meant to be good people. So they're all kind of our problematic faves. I would say I also my heart goes out to Lori. I don't think she is always the best in her delivery, but her willingness to just be like, okay, there's some stuff that's messed up. I'm going to call it out. That dynamic between the trio of friends. I'm thankful to not have friends like that, but I definitely am familiar with that dynamic of we have been friends for a long time. We're going to pretend like we all like each other, but we have judgments about the choices each of us is making in our life, and it's only going to continue to unfold. The other family dynamic that I'm watching a lot is the Ratcliffes, and not for the sexually scandalous.
The incest subplot?
Yeah, like not for that, but just their dynamics. They feel very familiar to me in a way.
I completely agree with that one. I feel like, especially having grown up in the South, I have seen this sort of like families that function this way where you have like the elder son who follows in the father's footsteps, and then you have like the rebellious daughter. They're just such like capital T types and such a type of family. And what they end up going through, I mean, the dad goes on like has on one whole journey, and the brothers definitely have a journey, and then the daughter is having her own journey. Like I like the way they point out that like the members of that family are having drastically different vacations all together, which I think is really interesting and also like feels relatable to me. I've definitely been on trips with my family where I'm like, we are each having an individual time, even as we literally are in the same car doing the same things together. Like this is not a group experience really. And same with those three friends. I have to say, like, I think a friendship trio can be really hard to pull off because it is easy to get sucked into this dynamic at times, or maybe not easy, but like normal, like the normative and normal to get sort of sucked into a dynamic if there's conflict in a trio where just like what any two of you talk about is the other one person at any given time. And that is 100% what these women are doing. It's like if the three of them are together, they're not talking about anything that matters until the conflict gets so big, they're talking about it and fighting about it. But like every time one of them leaves the trio, the other two just talk about the one who left. And like, woof, that is something I have witnessed many times. And I'm also grateful to not be a part of at this stage in my life. But I do see people fall into it for sure.
Yeah. It's funny because like two of my closest friends, we are a trio who have known each other from our first
Good for you.
job. And so it's been so funny to be like, oh yeah, that's not us. Like we have our own individual relationships and we have this group relationship. My other Signal group chat is with them. But to know like, oh, what a gift that we don't fall into what would be the natural or what could be the natural progression for trios. And also the reason I really like the Ratcliffes, I told you there's a couple lines that I wrote down, but Parker Posey's character, Victoria, she is one of the funniest characters. I think the funniest lines are just consistently from her this season, but also I feel like she's making the argument for what this season is about. She talks a lot about trying to figure out who people know. And the reason why she's trying to do that is because she wants to know if they're decent or if they're respectable. And so it's all of these people who societally should be considered respectable, either because they make a lot of money or because they're on TV or because they're a mom in Texas or because they're a high powered lawyer. There's all these different reasons. And yet, the more we get to know them, we could do these social markers and say, oh, yeah, they're a respectable person. Meanwhile, the two brothers are having this incestuous moment. Meanwhile, like someone is considering whether or not they're going to kill someone else. There's the whole thing with the dad who's like having visions of killing his whole family. The line that I wrote down is, if I'm not a success, then I'm nothing, and I can't handle being nothing. And that's the oldest son saying that to his father when he realizes that something is going on. The other line is from the mom who says, I don't think I'm meant to be uncomfortable at this stage in my life. And it's just this really interesting, they have formed their life to be considered decent and respectable, and yet none of them are really happy, to the point that the husband is feeling like if he loses everything, he has to kill them because what they've, yeah, exactly. Because what they've built their life on ultimately is sand.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about wealth for them, right? And it is fascinating to me the way that wealth seems to be all that's holding them together. And we get wealth in the form of success with the son, but also just like, and wealth in the form of like decency for the wife. But it's still all just on this foundation of like being wealthy. Like that is the sand. And it's interesting to watch, like, as that starts to crumble. I mean, they don't really know it's crumbling, but the dad does. Like, the only thing he can envision is murder suicide. And that's fucking bleak. And I'm really intrigued to see what happens with the daughter, because she's kind of shown up from this position of like, I'm rejecting your values. I want to come study at this like Buddhist temple and practice meditation and be in devotion for a year. But that also starts to like get like sort of break down as she actually tries out a night there or like has to spend her time that way. And I'm intrigued to see at the end. One of my like predictions for what will happen in the final episode, which will air shortly after this goes live. One of my predictions is like maybe the whole family will just stay in Thailand, because throughout the season we've met a lot of people who are in Thailand because they can't return to the US, and they, for various reasons, crimes, financial and otherwise. And so I'm intrigued to see if just like the whole family stays. Like she thought she was just going to be the one who was there, and now they're just like all at the monastery. Like I could totally see an ending where they're just like all there in robes meditating, trying to like deal with who they've become. Do you have any predictions for how anything else ends up? I have no clue who's dead. Like I'll just say, who knows who has died. I don't know who it was in episode 1, but I'm curious if you've had any other thoughts of how you think it's going to end.
Yeah, I know it's about to be a winding road because they said it's a 90-minute episode. So I'm like, we're gonna get fakes. My thought is, I don't think the gun actually kills someone. I really do think it's gonna be another Apple TV show slash book, like a bad monkey situation. I think a monkey's gonna get a gun or something and is gonna shoot something. They did the preview, they talked about this poisonous fruit, which makes me, and then we see a lot of the oldest son making smoothies. So I wonder, you're thinking they all stay in Thailand. I'm wondering if the murder suicide happens by
Oh,
the
the
dad making
smoothies.
everyone a smoothie.
I thought about the poison because I clocked that they put that at the end of the last episode, but I didn't think about putting it in a smoothie. I thought maybe the dad was just going to like fistful the poisonous berries, but damn, he's going to go all like Charles Manson Kool-Aid vibes. Okay, that's your prediction. I'm into that. I agree with you. I don't think the gun is going to be what kills someone. I think the gun and the dead body, or the gunshots and the dead body, are like different things somehow. And that's like a misdirection, which I love even more. It makes me like the gunshots and the Chekhov situation even more. Um, yeah, I'm so intrigued. I do hope that Chelsea gets like vindicated somehow. Like I want her to ride off into the sunset and be like a character. Like she just strikes me as the only one who is like trying her best in alignment
Mhm.
with how she thinks, like what she thinks it means to be a good person. I think she's actually the only character here who's doing that. Um, Maybe Piper, the daughter with the interest in Buddhism, but she seems more
I don't
compromised
think
to
she
me.
does. I just think she wants to rebel.
I would agree.
Like, I think she, I won't get into her. She just feels familiar to me in a sense of I went to Vanderbilt and I feel like I just knew a lot of Pipers.
Yeah, rich, young, white women whose idea of rebelling is like getting their parents to make a big donation to a Buddhist monastery so they can like live in Thailand for a year. Yeah, that tracks.
I'll just share one anecdote. I remember someone who just casually in conversation, we were driving somewhere and was like, oh, haha, I asked my mom to send me, it was something like $100, $500, and she accidentally sent me $100,000. It was just like a casual, like, and then it was just like, oh, that's so funny.
Oh my God. I can't
So,
even imagine. Can you imagine?
no, I can't. Clearly, I can't. And that's why I'm like, and she is and was such a kind person, but just this person who's like so in their wealth that I do wonder what's going to happen to Piper when she finds out her family doesn't have that wealth anymore. Cause it's like that was the baseline of her life, the safety net that allowed her to rebel. And is she still interested in rebelling once that is gone?
Yeah, I definitely think that's the arc her character's going on. Is like it's interesting to go like live minimally at this temple when you know all the money's at home. But what does it mean if that's actually just what your life is going to be like? So we shall see. We will have to do a circle back on the end of White Lotus next time when we also circle back on women TM and everything else we talked about today. Well, thank you, beautiful listeners, for spending pretty much 2 hours with us at this point and tuning in to our episode all about power in media, which was not totally planned, but where we ended up, I think, for sure. Taylor, do you have any final thoughts for the people this month?
Yeah. Memorize a poem and watch Paradise. Paradise, cut me a check because I'm telling a lot of people to watch your show. Or in lieu of a check, you can just set up a meet and greet with Sterling K. Brown. That would also be okay.
Yeah, I think that that is great recompense for all of your labor promoting the show. And I just want to say that my birthday is this month, and I am excited about that. At the end of a yikes bummer episode, I am not going to feel bummed walking away from this. I'm going to feel grateful for our friendship, and I'm going to think about something nice I want to do for my birthday so that I have something to look forward to over the next few weeks. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode of Thought of You. We are thinking of you, even though our Signal chat has been dethroned from the place of importance in all of our lives. And until next month, we will see you on Substack.
Bye.